Hello and welcome to another episode of Mountainside Thoughts here on Heavenward Thinking. Today we're continuing on in Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 through 11. So I'll read it and we'll get right into today's discussion. These are the laws you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free without paying anything. If he comes alone, he is to go free alone, but if he has a wife, when he comes, she is to go with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children, and do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door, or the doorpost, and pierce his ear with an awl. Then he will be his servant for life. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free, as male servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners, because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these 3 things, she is to go free, without any payment of money. So, Mike, this is a very different section than the one we just talked about. We talked about in the past couple weeks, Exodus chapter 20, the 10 Commandments. We all probably, at least most of us, have heard of the 10 Commandments, if we've not read it in depth, but we often don't go further than that. We don't usually turn the page to Exodus chapter 21, and we see why, because in this first section it seems to be something very different, talking about a whole 11 verses about servants and servitude and what those rules were supposed to be. But how can we look at this with a heavenward thinking perspective and apply something in this section?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a different pace from the last chapter. It makes you wonder if the page stuck when you're trying to turn it in the Bible. But it's just something that's very different. But clearly it's still important because there's a whole 11 verses on this section. And it really shows and lays out that God has a plan for each piece of the law that he planned. He didn't kind of just throw this together. He really thought it out and planned it out and considered all aspects of the people's lives and how was wanted to provide an answer for any questions that they might have. And we see in this that with the whole servant and servitude thing, overall, this is good instruction so that the masters don't abuse their servants um, and really take them and hurt them or make them work unfairly, because a lot of this is really protecting them in what they're doing. And you see people complain about, oh, there's mentions of slavery in the Bible, like that's not right. It's like, really, in this time, God has a specific layout and idea for situations like that, where the servant will work for them, but they're to be treated well and to be given freedom to eventually, if they so choose that. And if not, then they also have the right to be able to stay. And if anybody is to not provide for them, then we see in verse 11, then that the servant is supposed to go free, and that the master doesn't get any repayment for that because he treated them badly. And I think that's a good example of, you have to really look at the context behind some of these biblical principles before you make sweeping generalizations about the Bible. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, is that there was a lot more behind these concepts than they realize. Because yes, there's servitude and slavery that's mentioned in the Bible, but really it's all about giving good advice to be for servant-master relationships so that no one was abused or hated in either of those relationships, so that they could get along as possible and avoid the idea of slavery that sort of happened and that people have in their minds. And I think that's really something that people don't pay enough attention to, is the context behind this type of situation.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us, especially in today's culture where there's such an emphasis on this slavery issue, on racial stuff, and on social injustice and justice, I think it's a difficult topic, certainly a controversial topic. Will probably be taken off of Facebook for even addressing this. But when we look at Scripture And people like to point out that Scripture mentions race, or that there's some kind of racism in it, or there's some kind of mention of slavery. And we can point them as Christians, we can point them to passages like this, where we see that God had a very different design for the servant-master relationship than humanity had. Humanity has this idea, if you look throughout history, where we abuse slaves, where we abuse people we think as a lower class, or a lower form of life, or some tool for us to take advantage of. God had a very different plan. This 11 verses, as you showed, it shows how a master and a servant can have a good, godly relationship, and can live in harmony in this society. And so God, as he's detailing the plans for the Israelite nation, as he's laying out not just the 10 Commandments, but the whole entire groundwork for their nation for many, many years to come, as he's doing this, he's, as you said, he's going through all the different details. And this is one of them here. How can people in a master-servant relationship, how can they not only get along, but how can they treat each other well? So yes, the servant is doing their job, and as we see in the New Testament, even then, Paul was telling servants and slaves to obey their masters, to work hard for the Lord. But we see in the New Testament, as well as the Old, that God cared about the masters treating the servants well, treating them in a certain way that would be very different than all the other cultures around the Jewish people. Because as we mentioned before when we were looking at the 10 Commandments, God gave the 10 Commandments to the Israelites. One, to point to Jesus Christ and to point to our need for Jesus Christ, but also to show other nations who he was. That the Israelite people were supposed to be this priesthood of nations. They were supposed to be an example to the rest of the world. And so here we get the context of the master-servant relationship. They were supposed to be the example of this as well, where other people could look and see, hey, this is how we're supposed to treat other people, even if we are the master and they're the servant. Or, hey, this is how we need to act if we're the servant and this is our master. So we see here that there's a lot more to look at than to just simply say the Bible's racist or the Bible isn't right with a social justice idea. So we need to, when people criticize the Bible, when they criticize Christianity for different reasons, we need to be able to point to verses like this. So we have to look past just Exodus chapter 20 and move over to Exodus chapter 21. How can we, as Christians today, maybe in a society where we don't have slavery in the United States in the concept that we think of slavery, how can we apply this submission, this respect, into our daily lives and our daily relationships with other people?
Yeah, I think the first thing that popped into my head when you thought about that, you mentioned that was in Ephesians. I can't remember where the reference is, but somewhere in Ephesians it says, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." And I think that's a lot of where this is kind of going. Is we're supposed to be able to get along with each other in that way, out of reverence for Christ and our fellow believers. Is that we're able to kind of compromise on this and be willing to connect with each other, even though we might not agree to an extent, but that out of reverence for Christ, that we're able to put others' needs at a high level and look out for how we can help them in their everyday life. And I think that's kind of what this is generally pointing towards. And I think it's important that we kind of consider that, whether we're sort of in a kind of higher standing, we can take these, like, for example, say you are okay. I'll give an example of I'm at college. I've been here for a couple of years. I have friends. I know the campus well. I'm in a good position to where I'm at. Compare that to a freshman who's just coming in and is like, I have no idea. Like, I don't know people. I'm just getting used to this campus. I don't know where anything is. I can go out of my way, even though I might rather spend time with my friends. I can go out of my way to make sure that they are have somebody that they can talk to and be close to and figure out what's going on. So that way that I can show them what they need to do. And so, sort of like, I'm being able to reach out to them and being able to show them what to do, and with the love of Christ, and be able to um, out of reverence for Christ, be able to take on that fellow believer and help them in their individual walk, whether that's on campus figuring out what to do or kind of discipling them in their spiritual walk. And I think that's sort of what the verse kind of means to me is like, or if it was vice versa, and somebody was willing to do that for me, I think just being able to submit to one another out of our reverence for Christ is really the aim that we're looking at here.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way of putting it into a modern context, because so many of us, we look at this passage and we go, yep, I'm not even going to care about reading it, because what does that have anything to do with today? But as you just pointed out, there's a practical example right there of how we, as Christians, have the opportunity to either be leaders or in some cases to be submissive followers, and to be submissive and respectful to other people. And so it's important for us to look in and to dig deep and dive into this when we're looking at passages that may seem out of touch with society. We're able to see, with a heavenward thinking perspective, that they are very relevant and that they should inform our relationships with other people. We need to have the same respect that God was trying to institute between masters and servants. We need to have that healthy respect because we have opportunities as students on a college campus. You have an opportunity to be respectful and submissive to your authorities on campus, whether it be teachers or staff members or professors or whatever. And we have that opportunity throughout all of our life, whether it be in a job or we have a boss. We can be submissive to them, or we can choose not to be submissive to them. And if we look at a passage like this, we realize we do need to be submissive to them. Maybe we're in a position of authority. Maybe we are the boss or something like that. And then we're able to look at a passage like this and see that we need to be respectful and we need to treat people well when we're in that position of authority. So while people may look at this and think, why am I even looking at this? Why are we doing a 12 or 15-minute show on this? It's because it's very relevant, because respecting people and treating people well is part of loving people well, and that's a huge part of Christianity, loving God and loving people. So we see here that even at the beginning of the Israelite nation, God was establishing a different code, something totally different that would be a light to other people. So I would encourage our viewers to really consider what we've talked about, see how we can be submissive to one another, as you said, out of reverence for Christ. And as we do that, as we put others' needs above our own, like you said, as we treat people well, as we respect people and be submissive, that's where we can point people to Jesus Christ. So I would really encourage our viewers to do that and look for ways to be submissive to God and to be submissive to those around us so that we can point people to Jesus Christ. Well, I hope you've been encouraged and challenged by this episode and that you'll join us next time for another episode of Mountainside Thoughts here on Heavenward Thinking.